Day to everyone, especially to our instructors in this subject, Miss Almeida Boncales. Before anything else, I am going to introduce myself. I am May Rosales, a third year BS Ed College student from Trinidad Municipal College. Today, in this video presentation, I am going to tackle about mythological and archetypical approach. Without any further ado, let's start the discussion. What is mythological approach? Myth criticism is an interpretative approach to literature which may be used in conjunction with other approaches and reading techniques. A myth critical approach generally uncovers or identifies manifestations of mythology in a literary work, whether as the creation of an original myth, as the appropriation of traditional mythological figure, story or place, or in a form of allusions, and uses these mythological elements to aid interpretation of the work. While there has been some debate over the limitations of myth criticism and the form it ought to take, myth criticism is nevertheless a valuable tool equipping the critic to deal with the literary practice of mythopoeia, or myth-making. The term mythopoeia lays emphasis on the artist's appropriation of mythological elements, traditional or original, as an inherently creative act. An act of shaping. We're especially concerned here with traditional mythologies since they can appear to resist the shaping force of the artist's hands. When an artist imports a traditional myth into a literary work, the artist's rendering of a myth is placed into a dialogical relation with the work and myth tradition. Myth shapes the meaning of a literary work with all the depth and breadth of its accumulated meaning, while its manifestation in literary work breathes life into the tradition by both passing on and adding to its meaning. Myth criticism is concerned with the moment of contact between the often wide and varied tradition of a myth, especially as it is understood by the author and audience, and the literary work which contains a particular manifestation of interpretation of the myth. Archetypical approach. Archetypical literary criticism is a type of critical theory that interprets a text by focusing on requiring myths and archetypes in a narrative, symbols, images, and character types in literary work. It argues that archetypes determine the form and function of literary works. The meaning of a text is shaped by cultural and psychological myths. Archetypical images and story patterns encourage readers to participate ritualistically in basic beliefs, fears, and anxieties of their age. These archetypical features not only constitute the intelligibility of a text, but also tap into a level of desires and anxiety of humankind. Archetypical myth criticism is a form of criticism based largely on the works of C.Z. Jung and Joseph Campbell and myth itself. Some of the school's major figures include Robert Graves, Francis Ferguson, Philip Wheelwright, Leslie Fiedler, Northrop Frye, Maud Budkin, and G. Wilson Knight. Whereas Freudian, Lacanian, and other schools of psychological criticism operate within a linguistic paradigm regarding the unconscious, the Jungian approach to myth emphasizes the notion of image. The origin of archetypical. The word archetypical has a Greek origin. The arche means beginning or original, and typos means imprint or form. The term archetype can be traced to Plato, but the concept gained currency in 20th century literary theory and criticism through the work of C.Z. Jung. Jung's Psychology of Unconscious appeared in English 1 year after publication of G. G. Fraser's The Golden Bough. Fraser's and Jung's texts formed the basis of two allied but ultimately different courses of influence on literary history. In 1934, Maud Budkin published an archetypical patterns in poetry that is the first work of this subject. Archetypical criticism became popular in 1950s and 1960s largely due to the work of Frye. Though archetypical literary criticism is no longer widely practiced, it still has a place in the tradition of literary studies. Fraser. Fraser the Golden Bow was the first influential text dealing with cultural mythologies. It was widely accepted as the seminal text of myth and spawned numerous studies of the same subject. Eventually, the momentum of Fraser's work carried over into the literary studies. In the Golden Bow, Fraser identifies shared practices and mythological beliefs between primitive religions and modern religions. Fraser argues that the death, rebirth myth is present in almost all cultural mythologies and is acted out in terms of growing seasons and vegetation. Jung. While Fraser's work deals with mythology and archetypes in material terms, the work of Jung is immaterial in its focus. Jung's work theorizes about myths and archetypes in relation to the unconscious and inaccessible part of the mind. From Jungian perspective, myths are culturally elaborated representations of the contents of the deepest recesses of the human psyche, the world of the archetypes. Jungian psychoanalysis distinguishes between the personal and collective unconscious, the latter being particularly relevant to archetypical criticism. Jung's definition of the term is inconsistent in his many writings. Regardless of many nuances between Jung's definitions, the collective unconsciousness is a shared part of the unconscious. The Jungian archetypical approach treats literary text as the avenue in which primordial images are presented. Freire. The major work of Freire to deal with archetypes is Anatomy of Criticism, but his essay, The Archetypes of Literature, is a precursor to the book. Freire's work breaks from both Fraser and Jung in such a way that it is distinct from its anthropological and psychoanalytical precursors. For Freire, the death rebirth myth is not ritualistic since it is involuntary and therefore must be done. Freire was uninterested about collective unconscious. So examples of archetypical symbols. Archetypical symbols vary more than archetype narratives or character types. The best archetypical pattern is any symbol with deep roots in culture's mythology, such as the forbidden fruit on Genesis or even the poison apple in Snow White. These are examples of symbols that resonate with archetypical critics. The logical and archetypical approach emphasizes the recurrent universal patterns underlying most literary works. Combining the insights from anthropology, psychology, history, and comparative religion, mythological criticism explores the artist's common humanity by tracing how the individual imagination uses myth and symbols common to different cultures and epochs. One key concept in mythological criticism is the archetype, a symbol, character, situation, or image that evokes a deep universal response, which entered literary criticism from Swiss psychologist Carl Jung.